In this video, we're talking about how the French government came after Sony and won, how the next big game in one of Sony's biggest franchises might be skipping PS5, and how this might be one of the best PlayStation Plus months ever. How's it going, everyone? As always, my name is Jimmy Champagne. This is PSReady, my channel all about PlayStation. If you want to keep up to date on everything related to PlayStation and kind of get an insider perspective on it, you should subscribe to this channel and set your notifications to all, because this is objectively the best source on the internet. And before you take that literally, it was just a bit, okay? I'm sorry. You can't tell because this basement's pitch black. I'm filming earlier than usual today because I have to go to the Michigan equivalent of the DMV, which is called the Secretary of State. I need a license plate for the Jeep I bought over Christmas break, and I don't know, I just got a feeling that's not gonna go as swimmingly as I want it to, so I figured I'd film early and then just stare at my computer for a couple hours waiting for the appointment to happen. The first thing I want to talk about today is a lawsuit from the French government against Sony that has resulted in a huge fine, like a 13.5 million euro fine against Sony, and it all centers around controllers. So this all started actually back in 2015, right when the PS4 came out, a little bit into its life cycle actually, but Sony was upset because all these third-party controller makers, like I'm assuming Nyko, Mad Catz, all these brands that were like really prominent when I was growing up, when the GameCube and the PS2 and the Xbox were big. You could go to Target and go to the clearance rack and there would just be a mountain of controllers that you could get, and they were always cheap, so those were the ones I tended to get. I mean, even leading all the way up into high school with my PC, I had to get an Afterglow controller from GameStop, and that's going down as the worst controller I've ever used. It was like really crappy plastic. The click on the sticks was terrible. The sticks would kind of come out of their little holes once in a while. It was not a great experience using that. I just liked using wired controllers with my PC at the time. And then the second worst controller I ever had was for Christmas one year. My brother got a Wavebird for his GameCube, and I got this Mad Catz one that had fans in the like handles, and it was terrible. It was like one of the worst controllers ever. I did like it because it was wireless, but yeah, I didn't like that controller at all. But the caliber of controller I'm talking about when I talk about controllers like that, it feels like that's what Sony was going after, specifically because these controller manufacturers were creating controllers and they were able to just release them. They didn't have to get any licensing agreement or anything like that with PlayStation. They could just throw them out into the ether and say, hopefully these end up on a store shelf at Target someday and a little kid gets conned into buying one. So what Sony did is they tinkered around with presumably the PS4 and PS5 and said, hey, if you use these controllers on the PS4 going forward, they're not really going to work. You got to get a licensed controller from us. But where the issue comes up is Sony was like overly discretionary when handing out licenses to people who wanted to make controllers. I'm assuming that the people who made these third-party ones that they were able to make without a licensing fee are the ones that are upset about this. But yeah, basically what happened is Sony said, well, Mad Catz, we like you. You're the guys that have the publishing rights for Rock Band 4. You're making Rock Band controllers. That's pretty cool. We'll give you licensing rights for the PlayStation 5. But then, I don't know, Nyko, you make garbage controllers. You make shovelware for the Wii. You're not going to get a license for this controller. And because of that discretionary action that they took, the French government is sitting there like, hey, that's not cool. We are going to fine you 13.5 million euros, which it's a lot of money objectively. I think like if I got fined $13.5 million, I can't say what I would do about it on YouTube because it would be pretty bad. But if I'm Sony, a multi-billion-dollar company, and I get fined 13.5 million euros, not even dollars, it's euros. It's that European tender they've got over there. I don't know. I feel like that's just a slap on the wrist, a formality, because this lawsuit made its way all the way to the top. And if they find Sony 13.5 million euros, that's 13.5 million euros in the pockets of the French government. So it's a win-win for them and a lose-lose for Sony. But it's kind of like a lose-win for Sony because it's not that big of a fine. It is interesting though to see one of these lawsuits kind of make its way all the way to the finish line and actually go negative away from Sony, like not in their favor, because it seems like there are a lot of these that keep coming up. There's class action lawsuits, like the big prominent one right now is in the UK. Basically what this lawsuit says is that because Sony runs the only storefront to buy digital games on the PlayStation 5, and they take 30% of every sale of a game they don't publish, this lawsuit says that what they're doing is inflating the cost of games by 30%. They're saying if Sony didn't take 30% of every purchase, then third-party publishers would be able to sell their games 30% cheaper. Obviously, I think that's a stupid lawsuit. It doesn't really make sense. sense, especially when you consider that all the other storefronts like Steam, Xbox, not Epic Game Store, they charge a little bit less, but the standard across the board really is for the vast majority of these storefronts to take a 30% cut. It just seems like a weird move to go after Sony, and the only reason I can think of as to why that would be happening is that Sony's at the top, right? Like, I've seen a lot of people talking about this, but like Xbox really did put out some quality games in 2023. You have stuff like Hi-Fi Rush, Forza Motorsport, you've got Starfield, which I know it's like mostly disliked on Steam right now, but by all accounts that is a good game. Not the amazing game that we were expecting, but it is a good game. And no matter what they do, it doesn't really seem to move the needle on people buying Xboxes, and that's making people, I guess myself included, start to see that Sony has reached this mythic Apple tier where people just want a PlayStation. They aspire to own a PlayStation 5, and regardless of how many games are coming out from the first party or how few games are coming out from the first party, they're just happy to own this console because they've got a good feeling of quality when they pick it up. And Sony's done a really good job making that the case, right? It's not like something that happened overnight. They had the whole PS4 generation where they were pumping out amazing game after amazing game, and on a console that largely just worked really well and had a performance boost over the Xbox One. Now in this generation, the PS5 is a little bit slower than the Xbox Series X, but because of that generation where Sony was able to build up this digital library for people, it makes it so much harder for people to even want to get on the Xbox ecosystem. And yeah, I totally see that. So when you have someone at the top like this, like monolithic status that Sony has, they're going to have lawsuits going after them because, you know, they're at the top of the food chain and they have a lot of money. Do I think this lawsuit makes sense? No, I don't really. I feel like Sony is pretty cool about letting anyone make anything for the PlayStation ecosystem. It's a little bit different with the PlayStation 5 because, you know, you'd have to make haptic feedback, you'd have to make adaptive triggers, you'd have to work with a light bar. There's a lot more features that come along with the DualSense than you would have on something like a DualShock 3 or 4. But that being said, there are third-party controllers out there for the PlayStation 5. I talked about one over the Christmas break, the Nacon Revolution 5 Pro, and then the Scuf controllers. So it's not like they're actually actively blocking people from making them. They're just making it harder by the virtue of the controller having a lot of features. So yeah, this lawsuit, it went through, they got fined. I don't think it's a sign of times to come that are bad for Sony. I think they'll be just fine making a bunch of money that they can then spend on games. Next up here, I want to talk about the next big game in the Horizon series because it's had quite a few leaks going on, and let's just get this straight. So right now, it seems like there are 4 Horizon games in development. The first one is a Last of Us Part 1 style remake of Horizon Zero Dawn for the PlayStation 5. So you're going to get better graphics, better resolution, 60 FPS, you know, all the bells and whistles that come along with a remaster like that. The second thing they have in development over at Guerrilla is, of course, a trilogy ender for the Horizon series. They've got Horizon Forbidden West. It ends on a cliffhanger, so they want to make a third game in the series to really wrap things up. That's another no-brainer title. The other ones are nebulous because at first it seemed like there were 2 titles, and then it kind of seemed like for a second that maybe they were one title in just one game coming out, but now it seems like there are 2 things going on. The first one is a Monster Hunter style multiplayer game that's being developed in a Western studio, it seems like. So that's going to be a multiplayer series where, you know, you can climb the tall necks, you can climb the thunder jaws, you can take them down piece by piece in a multiplayer setting. You won't have the OP god abilities that Aloy has, but you might have some survival style tools that you can use. And then the second game, which is the main focus of this story, seems to be an MMO set in the Horizon universe, and it seemed cool at first, but the more I hear about it, the less excited I get. So right now, this is being called Project Skyline, and all the details we know about it have been leaked recently by a job listing. And as it stands right now, it seems like this game is not going to be coming to PlayStation 5. The best analog I could think of for it was like Honkai Star Rail or Genshin Impact, because I thought those were just mobile and PC, but Genshin does have a PS5 port, if I remember correctly. So this is even weirder than it was initially. But I think Genshin also just came out originally on mobile and PC, and then eventually the PlayStation 5 port happened. So this seems like to be exactly what's going on with this Project Skyline. You're going to be able to play it on mobile, you're going to have one account, and then when you get home, you'll be able to hop on your PC, log into your account, and just pick up right where you left off. And the way these games work is you collect characters, and the way you do it is through like a slot machine method, I guess, and then you can level your character up, but then you can get like a better version of that character. I don't know. I don't play these kinds of games because I will get hopelessly addicted to them and spend all of my money. I just can't even let myself start it. But yeah, hearing that description, I feel like I'm getting across what kind of game this is going to be. It's just going to be something to print money for Sony, which is what they want, right? Like we've heard from Jim Ryan a few years ago that by this point in time that we're in right now, the beginning of 2024, half of Sony's games that we're playing are going to be on mobile, and they obviously have not hit that milestone and they haven't even come close to it. But if they are working on an MMO that's for PC and mobile with NCSoft that's in the Horizon universe, it seems like they're doing exactly what they said. They're going to leverage their biggest IP like Horizon and, make games that are on mobile only and not on PlayStation 5. The weird thing is, I don't know why you would skip PS5 other than maybe Sony's a little bit nervous about a game like this cheapening the Horizon brand overall. I always talk about this on the channel, but I just don't see the hype with Horizon. It seems like it sells pretty well, but then I never hear anybody talking about it. And then of course, when I say that, there's a bunch of people in the comments that do start talking about it. I think one of my big goals for 2024 is going to be to finally go back and finish Horizon Forbidden West and maybe play Burning Shores on my PSVR 2 if I can find the time, because it looks like this release schedule is going to be a lot clearer than it was last year. But yeah, it is a big franchise for Sony, because I just saw a comparison on Twitter the other day where it was comparing the sales of Nintendo first party games to Sony first party games, and Horizon did Pokemon numbers. It sold incredibly well. So knowing that, it's a big brand for Sony, and maybe they don't want a gacha style slot machine game cheapening the brand by releasing it on Western PlayStation 5s. Regardless, it is a little weird. I'm just glad that they're partnering with other studios to do stuff like this, studios who know what they're doing, instead of wasting the time of the developers that we want working on stuff like Horizon or, any of the multitude of other Sony franchises like The Last of Us or Uncharted. That's what their time is better served doing than making mobile multiplayer games. And if their best crown jewel studio, Naughty Dog, can't get anything happening with this Factions multiplayer game, I don't want to see what's going to happen at some of the lesser studios. I put lesser in air quotes because they're all really good studios, but the point stands that if their crown jewel studio can't figure it out, the other ones probably wouldn't have a great time doing it as well. And they also have studios that are just made to make live service games, like Jade Raymond's studio making Concord or Fair Games, whichever one they're putting out. You know what I'm saying? And the third story on my list here is that PS Plus Essential is out now in January, and these games are really good. So if you subscribe to the lowest tier of PS Plus, you're going to be able to add these games to your account and keep them forever as long as you're paying for Essential, which is great. The first game you're getting is a PS5 game that got really good reviews. It's called A Plague Tale Requiem. It's sort of like a game that sits in the middle ground between AA and AAA. It's narrative driven, it's third person. It's got a lot more combat than the first game, which was A Plague Tale Innocence, and people really, really like this game. It was a powerhouse on the PlayStation 5 when it came out. It was pushing the console so hard that the performance mode kind of splits the difference and runs at 40 FPS while the quality mode runs at 30 FPS like we're used to, but the graphics are really good in it, and I have heard nothing but good things about this game. And honestly, I was kind of waiting to pick it up, so I'm glad that it's available for free on PS Plus Essential. It might be something I check out during the month of January. The second game on the list is one that I definitely think is worth trying out though. It's called Evil West. This was a AA third-person shooter that came out over the summer. It's like a new IP. I think the studio that makes it is either Flying Wild Hog or People Can Fly. It's the people who made the Hard Reboot FPS game, and they just live in this perfect little AA shooter space, and I loved everything they were doing with this game. It feels really good to play. You're shooting monsters like werewolves and stuff out in the desert. It's got a really cool Western theme. You're part of this secret organization that hunts monsters, and I know there's a lot of Weird West games coming out in the past few years, like Weird West, Blood West, Evil West. There's so many games with the word West in them. This is the one that really hooked me out of all the ones I tried. Blood West is also pretty cool, but yeah, I think this game is definitely worth grabbing on the PlayStation Plus Essential roster, just because, a lot of people skipped it when it came out because 2023 was such a big year for gaming, and it's a budget game at the end of the day. And the third game is another one I think you should try out. Yes, all three of these games are worth trying. It's called Nobody Saves the World. I'm pretty sure it launched on Game Pass when it initially released. It's from Drinkbox, the people behind the two Guacamelee games, and I think it's called Mutant Blobs Attack or something like that. It was an indie game I played on Vita. Regardless, they're a really cool sort of hand-drawn style looking studio, and this is an action RPG where you're a character called Nobody, and you get the power to turn into a bazillion different characters and use their powers to kind of make your way through this roguelite action RPG style dungeon.